What's up, everybody? If you're thinking about moving to DC, but you want to know what it's really like, well, this is a video for you. I was born in DC, grew up there, so today I'm going to give you my updated pros and cons of living in Washington, DC. So let's just dive right in. And if you're thinking about moving to Washington, DC or Maryland and you'd like our help, just send us an email, we'll set up a Zoom, we'll get you started. So my first pro about living in DC has got to be the culture. You have access to some of the greatest museums and zoo here in DC, all part of the Smithsonian, so they are all free. Some of my favorites are the National Portrait Gallery, the African American Museum of History, the Air and Space Museum. There are so many different museums to go to for all shapes and sizes and all ages. Growing up here as a kid, we love the Air and Space Museum. But now as an adult, my kids love to go to the zoo, and they're all free. Mind you, parking is expensive, but we'll get to that later. And it's just not about the museums. You also have the Kennedy Center, which gets top-notch performances all year round. And you get all those beautiful monuments to visit. Besides the Washington Monument and the mall, you can head down to the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, the Vietnam Wall. It is just riddled with beautiful white buildings and history that you can make a day of it, have a picnic, and just enjoy the day in DC. So that's probably my number one pro, but there are a lot more. In fact, while we're on going and making a day of visiting all these monuments, if you're ready to have some food, DC has you covered. We have amazing restaurants here in DC. Anything you want. You want great Chinese food? Go to Chinatown. You want amazing Ethiopian food? Head over to Adams Morgan. You can find basically any type of food you want. And if you're a foodie like me, you're gonna be picky and you will not be disappointed. We have everything from Michelin star restaurants to any type of food you would ever want right here in DC. So that's gonna be my number two pro for living here. All the wonderful restaurants you get to explore. So my next reason for wanting to live here is something a lot of you aren't gonna know unless you already live here, but it's really important, especially if you're thinking about having a family. Here in DC, if you're a resident of DC, when you go to apply for colleges, you get access to something called the DCTAG. DCTAG stands for DC Tuition Assistance Grant. And what that means is, and you gotta look it up to get the exact details on how to apply, but basically DC will help you with your tuition to any public university all over the country by providing you up to $10,000 a year in tuition. Like I said, look it up, apply. In fact, I'll put a link below, and I do talk about it in some of my other videos, but it's really important to understand what your benefits are if you do live in Washington, DC when it comes time to college, because this is a big one. DCTAG, definitely look it up before moving here because I think you'll be really happy when you find out what it's all about. So moving on to sports. We love our Nats here in DC and our Caps. The Nationals have done us proud. They won the World Series a couple years ago. And the Capitals, well, I think that the most exciting hockey team to watch. Yep, yes, we won the Stanley Cup as well a few years ago. So here in DC, you do have great sports. You've got the Nats and you've got the Caps. There's another DC team that I'll talk about a little bit later, but for now we're staying on the pros, and that's the Nats and the Caps. So my next reason why it's so great to live here in Washington, DC is that you have such an easy access to get around the city. We have both a stellar metro system that really will take you anywhere you need to go around the city. We also have the Capital Bike Share system, which means you can actually go take a bike and then you drive where you want to go and you let that bike off at another station. It's super easy. There's bike shares all over the city. And we have a super high walkability score. In fact, I think we are ranked number 4 out of all the cities in the United States for easy access and a high walkability score. So if you want to live in a city and you don't want to have a car, DC is a great choice. Between all these different ways to get around, it really has a lot of easy access to get all around the city. And the summers here in DC, although they are hot, and I'll get to that in a second, are so much fun. There are so many different things to do outside in this city. And in the summer, one of my favorites is to go down to Georgetown to the boathouse and take out kayaks and canoes and stand-up paddleboards and paddle all around the river, and you can see the Kennedy Center and Georgetown and the wharf. And it's really kind of cool to be walking on water, as I say when you're on a stand-up paddleboard, or be in a kayak or canoe and see all these beautiful buildings around you. It's really something special about DC. So one of my other pros is the summer fun here in DC. Another great reason to move to DC has gotta be for jobs. We have a lot of jobs here in DC. Besides all the government jobs, we have the NIH, the National Institute of Health, we have the World Bank, we have Walter Reed Medical Center. There are just so many job opportunities right here in this city or right outside in Northern Virginia or in Bethesda or Chevy Chase, Maryland. Even Amazon just moved right to Northern Virginia. So if you're looking for a job between all the different government jobs and everything else I just mentioned, DC has really got so many opportunities for you. So now back to what I was saying earlier about the summers, because my next one is a pro and a con. So we'll get right into the cons after that. And that is the weather. So here's the deal. In DC, the good thing is you get all 4 seasons. You get the falls, which are unbelievably beautiful with all the leaves changing. You get winters and you get enough snow to go out and have some fun. But by the way, just so you know, if you live in DC and they even think it's gonna snow, they will close schools and they will shut down the government. So just be aware of that because it will happen. But then you get to go out and have some fun in the snow. You have the beautiful springs with all the flowers blooming and the cherry blossoms and all that good stuff. But here's where it kind of turns for me, and that is the summers. So the summers are really beautiful up until about the second week in July until the end of August, and then they get really, really hot and really, really humid. So what do? Well, most of us here, we head out to the beach. We go to either Delaware, Rehoboth, or Maryland, Ocean City, and if you are staying in the city, you'll find yourself on the Potomac River a lot doing that water sports that I spoke about earlier. So the weather is a definite pro, but it's also a con unless you love hot, humid summer days. So my next con about living in DC has gotta be that it is very expensive to live here. In fact, extraspaces.com cites Washington, DC as one of the most expensive places to live in the United States, second only to Hawaii. I'm not so sure that's true, but I do know it is very expensive to live here. Now, could you find different pockets within DC that are more affordable? Sure, it's a city like any others. There are definitely more affordable places within the city, but in general, as a whole, when it comes down to groceries and gas and everyday living, I just need you to know that Washington, DC is very expensive to live in. So what do we have so far? It's hot and humid in the summer. It's definitely expensive, like most cities are. But I gotta tell you, this next one, this is what may be a deal breaker for you, depending on where you're coming from. And that is the traffic here in DC is the worst I think I've ever seen. Washington, DC was designed after Paris, France, so it's got a lot of circles in it. And those may be really pretty to see from afar, but driving through them is kind of a nightmare. The traffic in DC is terrible. It hasn't been that bad these last couple years. I'm filming this in June of 2022. So you know, recently people have been working more at home, but in general, just be prepared that the traffic is really bad. But like I said previously, we do have a great metro system. We have the Capital Bike Share. There are other ways to get around the city, but driving in of its own is bad. And to double down on the traffic, what's even worse is the parking. There is literally no place to park in DC unless you want to pay a lot of money. All those free Smithsonian museums are lovely, but the parking at them all is incredibly expensive, so make sure you take the metro. So just be aware that the traffic is bad and the parking is worse. And that's just what you gotta deal with if you live in DC. And the next con about living here, well, is if you're into politics, you're gonna be very disappointed because here in DC, we do not have representation. We just don't. There's petitions to make us a state. That may happen, it may not. Right now in the summer of 2022, I don't see it happening anytime soon. So if you're really into voting and wanting senators and representatives in the House of Representatives, you're just not gonna get them if you live in DC. In fact, if you drive around, you'll notice a lot of the license plates say taxation without representation. Well, that's why. It's because we just don't have our own independent representation as of today in the summer of 2022. is what it is. So let's get back to the whole sports thing I was talking about earlier. Yes, we have sports here in Washington, D.C. We do have a football team. It is now called the Washington Commanders as of right now in the summer of 2022, and we're not sure how they're going to perform. We've had a bit of controversy surrounding our football team, both in the name and other things, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but you can look it up. And well, we're just not that happy with them right now. We love our Nats, we love our Caps, and well, I'm sure we'll come to love our football team again. I guess I should just speak for myself. I guess I will come to love our football team again, but right now I'm on a wait and see. Let me see what you can do. The good news is that we do have the Baltimore Ravens right next door, but as a Washingtonian like me, we kind of don't want to do that. We like to stick with our own. But just know if you are moving here from outside of the city, there is the Ravens right next door, and maybe the Commanders will prove me wrong and become a great, fabulous Washington football team. Another problem with living here, and it's just something we have to deal with, is that we get a lot of tourists coming to visit our great city. In fact, in 2019, we had 25 million tourists. It obviously slowed down in 2020 and since then, but it's gonna come back. So we're already a lot of people in a small city, so it's already very crowded. I mentioned the traffic and the parking. Add in that influx of tourists, and it can be a little annoying. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone, but if you're thinking about living here, you gotta deal with it. So we just have to deal with all those tourists coming to see our beautiful city, because it is the nation's capital, on a daily basis, and it can be annoying, especially because they don't really understand how we do things here. But it is what it is, like I said before. Just know it's crowded, and a lot of it is because of the tourism. So these are some of my top pros and cons of living in Washington, D.C. I have made other videos. In fact, check out Avoid D.C. if you want more in-depth on my cons of living here, or 13 things you must know if you're thinking about moving to Washington, D.C. They're great videos if you're thinking about moving here. And like I said at the beginning, if you would like our help in making this transition as smooth as possible, just send us an email. We would love to help you. We've got your back morning, afternoon, and night. And if you did enjoy this video, please consider sharing it with a friend, smashing that like button, and subscribing. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm and motivates us to make more videos. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Bye.